This episode, join me as I continue my pursuit of Arkansas's capital. In 1821, just 3 years after the territory of Arkansas was formed, its capital would move up the Arkansas River, leaving behind forever Arkansas Post. The early territorial government was marked by triumph and tragedy. But what led to political rivalry, grand construction, and even bloodshed? To find out, travel with me as I journey to the settlements that competed for power. Tour the oldest surviving Capitol building west of the Mississippi River, and return to the Old West to relive a fight to the death with Bowie knives in the House of Representatives. So watch out. History's coming.
I think that's the boat we should have taken.
Hi, I'm Rob Reep. As leaders in that first General Assembly held at Arkansas Post searched for a location that was healthier and more centrally located, two possibilities came to mind: Cadron and Little Rock. The name Cadron Settlement was a bit misleading. It was used to refer to an area that had been settled by 30 to 40 white families who sparsely populated the area along these banks of the Arkansas River near Cadron Creek. Land speculator John McElmurray arrived in this area sometime before 1818. He and 3 other investors laid out a town, which they called Cadron, on a 64-acre parcel of land. Well, it took quite a hike to get out here, but it was well worth it. Right over here behind me, we have a replica of a blockhouse built by Mr. McElmurray. Now, it was used as his residence, a tavern, and protection for his fur trading business. What do you say we go check it out? The Cadron settlement seemed well suited for growth and development. It was linked to Arkansas Post, St. Louis, and Hot Springs by roads and trails. Little Rock also seemed to be a good location for establishing a capital. In 1772, French explorer Jean-Baptiste Bernard de la Harpe landed near this small rock formation on the southern bank of the Arkansas River. He built a small trading post and called it La Petite Rock, meaning Little Rock. In 1812, fur trapper William Lewis built a home in Little Rock. Robert Crittenden and Chester Ashley became partners and established the Rose Law Firm, which is the oldest west of the Mississippi River. On February 20th, 1820, a bill was introduced to relocate the capital from Arkansas Post to the Cadron settlement where Cadron Creek empties into the Arkansas River. The bill was passed, but not without amendments. One of those amendments was Cadron's demise. It changed the location for the new capital to Little Rock. Even at such an early date in the territory's history, political scheming and controversy were brewing. Several legislators rushed to invest in land in the Little Rock area. October came and the vote in the legislature was 6-3 in favor of Little Rock. Governor Miller signed it into law. 2 groups of investors claimed to own the same land in Little Rock. It would take the Territorial Supreme Court to settle the dispute. The investors who lost in the court picked up their buildings and literally moved them in the middle of the night. So in 1821, the historic move was finally made. Other businesses followed. One of those was the Arkansas Gazette, which had been founded by William Woodruff. It was the territory's first newspaper, and today it is the oldest continually published newspaper west of the Mississippi River. I have no doubt that one of the things Mr. Woodruff reported on was the federal government's building of a road from Memphis to Little Rock. The road would later extend to Fort Smith, the western border of the United States. It was called the Military Road. Details for the road construction were very specific. It was supposed to be 24 feet wide and cleared of all trees. Sturdy bridges were to be built across rivers and creeks. But when the road opened to traffic in 1828, tree stumps were still present. Many of the bridges washed out during heavy rains. And at best, a coach traveling on the road averaged a speed of only 3 miles per hour. A non-stop trip from Memphis to Little Rock would have taken about 45 hours. It was in the first decade that mail service came to the territory. Cities received mail every week or two. Some accounts say the post rider arrived with the whole state's mail in his shirt pocket. In 1822, the Eagle arrived in Little Rock, ushering in steamboat traffic to the capital city. In 1828, the second territorial governor of Arkansas, George Izard, died. In 1829, President Jackson appointed John Pope to fill the vacancy. Shortly after Pope's appointment, sparks of friction heated up politics in Arkansas. Congress granted 10 sections of land to the territory. Money from the sale of these sections was to be used to build a capitol. But Secretary Crittenden devised a plan to give his brick home, which once stood on this corner in Little Rock, to be used as the Capitol building. In exchange, he wanted the 10 sections of land. The legislature approved the proposal. However, once it reached the desk of Governor Pope, the measure was vetoed. President Jackson dismissed Secretary Crittenden amid this controversy and replaced him with William S. Fulton. Crittenden, a major power in Arkansas politics for a decade, found himself at odds with the family, a powerful political dynasty that had organized in the state. The political machine was comprised of people who were members of or had connections to the Conway, Sevier, Johnson, Rector, and Ashley families. After a mudslinging campaign for the territory's delegate to Congress in 1829, Crittenden, a friend of the losing candidate, challenged Henry W. Conway, the winner, to a duel. 3 days later, Conway died from Crittenden's pistol blast. President Jackson appointed Governor Pope to select a site and oversee the construction for the territory's Capitol building. In 1833, the governor chose a prominent location on the banks of the Arkansas River, and construction began. In that same year, Ambrose Sevier introduced a bid for statehood. But after 2 years, Congress had not moved on the issue. A movement began across the territory to push harder for statehood. But this movement was not without opposition. Those who favored statehood believed it would increase the population of Arkansas and bring greater benefits to the area. The opponents feared that statehood would give more political power to the wealthy slave-owning planters. While Congress remained at an impasse, construction on a new Capitol building in Little Rock continued. To learn more about the Capitol and get a first-hand look, I've arranged a tour at the Old State House Museum. Now, I could just drive over to the Old State House, but that just wouldn't be Washed Out History's coming. So instead, I'm going to hitch a ride with the City of North Little Rock's Maritime Museum. Technology had without a doubt improved over the past 50 years, but in the 1820s, rivers were still the main means of transportation, especially in the rough and tumble wilderness territory of Arkansas. Well, here we go.
And we're off.
Thanks to the kind folks at the North Little Rock Maritime Museum, we're going to get an on-the-river view of what newcomers to Arkansas would have seen when coming up the river for the very first time. Other than the Little Rock port and a few barges, this would have been the wild view that greeted visitors to Arkansas. As we travel up the river, I notice an abundance of flora and fauna just outside modern-day Little Rock. I can't help, honestly, but to think that in the 1820s, visitors to Arkansas and people moving here were probably pretty overwhelmed. I mean, if you look out here, all these banks now are man-made. But in the 1820s, it would have been nothing but green, nothing but trees, a lot of flora and a lot of fauna, and it would have been wild. And this place was still pretty untamed. So it was probably a pretty overwhelming sight. As we near Little Rock, my attention is once again torn away from the awe-inspiring river to the modern-day buildings that now tower over the city. Now, if you can picture this skyline without any of these tall buildings or any of these man-made banks, it would look like a very small settlement. But if you look just over here, you can see the old State House. It was meant to do one thing: impress you. I think that's the boat we should have taken. After I arrived, I met up with my tour guide, Nick Baugh of the Old State House. What an impressive building.
Yeah, it's a really impressive example of Greek Revival architecture.
Who designed this building?
The designer was a man named Gideon Schrock. He was a really famous architect at the time. He was really well known for his other examples of Greek Revival style. The original Kentucky State Capitol, numerous banks across the country.
Do you mind if we go in and take a look?
Absolutely.
Construction must have been a massive undertaking.
Oh, it truly was. Actually, we have a few of the original bricks that were made on site.
Wow, are these some of the actual bricks that were made on site?
Yeah, these are some of the original bricks, and every brick that was used in the building was made on site by slave labor mostly.
Wow. Nick explained that the government moved into this building in 1836. Our first governor, James Conway, was inaugurated in the building on September 18, 1836. He was the brother of Henry Conway that was killed by Robert Crittenden in a duel.
Politics back then and even today is a pretty deadly game. There's actually a more interesting story about that upstairs. Here we are. Yeah, it was in this room, the original House of Representatives chamber in 1837, where two representatives pulled out their 10-inch Bowie knives and settled an argument that ended in murder.
Wait a second, so they let them bring Bowie knives into the House of Representatives?
Yeah, that's right. They would have to check their pistols downstairs at the front door, but your Bowie knife is something you could never leave home without.
Wow. What were these two men arguing about?
Well, there was a measure up for debate about wolf hides. If you killed a wolf, you could skin it, bring the hide in to your local magistrate, and you're supposed to get a bounty, a little change. Mr. Wilson was the Speaker of the House. He was leading the debate. He called him Mr. Anthony, who's sitting there in the back. Mr. Anthony said, "Hey, why doesn't the Land Bank of Arkansas pay it?" Basically, it was like he was making fun of Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson was the president of the bank, and he didn't take very kindly to that. He told Mr. Anthony to sit down and be quiet. Mr. Anthony stood resolute, refused to yield the floor. Mr. Wilson told him a second time, and a third time he threatened him with his knife, yield, or he would be forced to yield. Mr. Anthony pulled out his knife. They met each other in the middle of the floor here, had a knife fight, and it ended with Mr. Wilson stabbing Mr. Anthony right in the heart, and Mr. Anthony fell to the floor and died right there in the middle of everything.
So you're saying there was a murder right here in this chamber during the second session of the state legislature?
Yeah, right in the middle of the floor. The homicide was taken to trial, but the murderer was later acquitted.
I think I need to take a trip to historic Washington, Arkansas to learn more about this knife from an actual bladesmith. The famous Bowie knife was created by a blacksmith named James Black in one of the 9 blacksmith shops that existed in this thriving town on the Southwest Trail. I think I'm in for a real treat. Bladesmith Billy Nations has agreed to explain how the knife was constructed, shared the legend behind the knife, and even helped me conduct a test to show why this knife was so deadly. So let's go in. Mr. Nations, I'm here to learn about a knife that I've heard was used in a fight and a murder in the Arkansas State Legislature in the 1800s. And I've heard that historic Washington is where I needed to come to learn about it.
Well, you come to the right place.
First, can you tell me about the legend of the knife?
Well, Robert, when I talk about the legend of this knife, at least from my point of view, it's an exercise in human nature, because the people of that day and time became really enamored of all things Bowie, at least in this region.
What did the first Bowie knife look like?
Well, just so happens I'm holding one right here that could be a candidate to be a close resemblance of it. You see, this is a pretty crude example of what some people might say is just a straight back glorified butcher knife. From the account, it was a 10-inch blade, which is what we have here, straight back with just no guard and a wooden handle. This was the edge of the southwestern frontier of the United States at that time. And you had a situation where if you had an encounter, a single shot might not get it. So you had to have something to back it up. They started talking about this knife he had, this large butcher knife. The knife got bigger. Every telling, the knife was a little bit bigger, a little more special.
So the knife is more or less an evolution. It starts off as this game knife for hunting purposes, and then it evolves, basically due to word of mouth, into a fighting knife.
It evolves into primarily a weapon of self-defense that can also be used as a tool on the frontier.
So what was the next evolution in the stage of Bowie knives?
If you go to Historic Arkansas Museum, there is a knife that is actually referred to as Bowie No. 1 that we believe quite strongly is a candidate to be the knife that Black made for Bowie. This is what this would look like finished out. Now, this is a slightly different knife, but it's definitely the style that Black would have been making. This is an actual profile of the Bowie No. 1 that's up in Little Rock right now. And ultimately, we'll finish this one into the finished product.
Well, I mean, this is a good sized knife. I mean, it's almost like holding a mini sword in some aspect.
It's a throwback to the old short sword. The idea is you line the tip up as you extend your arm forward, and you always know where the tip is. And so a good fencer, that's what he'd want to do to get an encounter over with as soon as possible. He wants to use it as a thrusting weapon to dispatch his enemy, and having that tip where you can do that is a great asset. Number two, if we turn it this way, notice the angle, or this radius, if you will. All right. At this point, if you were to stand here, an opponent come at you with this blade, all I have to do is use my arm in the radius of my arm, and this blade will go up underneath your rib cage.
All right, let's test this thing out and see how it works.
Well, I wanted to bring this out because it's the type of material that Black would have used to test out his knives. He didn't have 2x4s back then the way we do today. But he liked to use wood like hickories, things like that, in order to test his knives, which are hard. He'd chop around on a hickory limb, and then he'd come back and see if his knife's still shaved and everything. And that's the story. I don't know how much of that's absolutely true, but we know he did test out his knives some. So what we're going to do is just use this knife here. This is one that we have here at the shop, and we actually do some demos with it. So we're going to take it and see if we can use this as a tool to make this a little shorter. All right. Well, it didn't take too long. You see, one of the things that happened in this part of the country was as knife design supplanted the old belt axe from colonial times. And so it was a self-defense weapon, also could be used as a tool. And it's a lot better to have one of these in a fight than it would be to have a tomahawk. Because you can use it much like you would a belt axe, but at the same time you got a thrusting weapon built in.
As we look at this piece of wood, the knife that was used is used for visitors that come to Washington pretty often, so it hasn't been sharpened, but obviously it's still pretty deadly and can do a lot of damage.
And it'd do the same thing to
A human
whatever
body.
it hit.
Yeah. It's just a very deadly weapon in general.
Snap a bone.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back in Little Rock, Arkansas's bid for statehood was still underway. In January of 1836, delegates met to draft a proposed state constitution. Charles F.M. Nolan was given the task to present the proposed document to Congress. Meanwhile, the Arkansas Gazette published a copy of the proposal in the paper. You might find it interesting to note that Woodruff mailed a copy of his paper to Congress. The U.S. Post Office beat Nolan to Washington, D.C. Congress approved the state constitution from the newspaper before Nolan ever arrived. Arkansas became the 25th state added to the Union on June 15, 1836. According to an earlier agreement in Congress, the Missouri Compromise, states were admitted in pairs, one a free state, the other a slave state. Arkansas entered the Union as a slave state. Michigan, our sister state, entered as a free state a year later. This was due to a border dispute. The power and influence of the family proved to be strong in the first state elections. It seems they swept victory in all of the state offices. James S. Conway, the brother of Henry Conway, who had been killed by Crittenden in the duel, was elected the state's first governor. The new state government moved into the State House while it was still under construction. Archibald Yell was elected to represent the state in the United States Congress, while William S. Fulton and Ambrose H. Sevier were selected by the state's General Assembly to represent the state in the United States Senate. The state proved prosperous in its early days. 1 year after statehood, the government found itself with a $50,000 surplus. But what would they do with all of this money? They reduced taxes and voted to spend $20,000 to build a prison. The site chosen for this correctional institution would be a hill west of Little Rock, a site that would later play another important role in the state's history. The state experienced growth in population, churches, schools, and economic enterprise. Much of the wealth of the economics of the state were based on cotton. The production of cotton increased the need for slave labor. By 1860, there were over 100,000 slaves living in the state, a fourth of the state's population. However, 82%, 4 out of 5 of the white population in the state, owned no slaves. The wealthy few owned 78% of the slaves and 63% of the land. Slavery would continue to play a major role in the state. While slave labor completed the construction of the Grand Capitol building of Arkansas, it would soon be the focus of a heated debate that would split the state of Arkansas and the nation.